This is episode number 142 of the Mixology Talk podcast, and this week we're talking with Scott Guerin, the chef who heads up the research and development arm of Modernist Pantry. So he's going to enlighten us on all things foams and caviars, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mixology Talk podcast. I have another special guest here, Scott Guerin from Modernist Pantry. I'm very excited to have you on, so thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of the modern styles of cooking and some of the equipment and supplies that you guys offer. And I'm going to pick your brain because I have a ton of questions about the style of cooking, especially how it applies to cocktails.
As most people do, so.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you're using some techniques and some ingredients that aren't typically found in most people's pantries. And I'm sure there's kind of a learning curve to kind of get up to speed on this and figure out, how to use these things correctly.
Yeah, it's one of those things that obviously you may find some of them at grocery stores nowadays, but you're never going to find in such small amounts. And that's kind of what we do here at Modernist Pantry. We sell it in small, manageable amounts for, the home cook, and we also sell it in larger amounts for the professional cook. So we kind of try to cater to everyone, so everyone can be able to do this. If you're just a mixologist at home, or you're working on a bar and you come up with a new cocktail and you want to put it on the menu, but you obviously need more than 50 grams of a ingredient, then yeah, you could do that as well.
Perfect. Now, can you kind of paint a broad brushstroke of kind of like what you guys do and really who you're aiming your ingredients for and like some of the techniques that can be used with it?
Yeah, so we try to cover anything that's kind of cutting edge in cooking. We want to be at the forefront of it. So obviously ingredients are one thing. We sell large number of ingredients, upwards of 200 that do all sorts of different, thickening to gelation to spherification, foams, you name it, we got it kind of mentality. So we try to be there, and we go all the way into fermentation and curing, items like that. So a little bit more deep, and obviously some of them are more advanced, some of them are more beginner level, intermediate level. So we try to just cater and allow people to get in on the bottom level and kind of level up their cooking as they go.
Great. And so all the fun stuff in cooking, all the sciencey, geeky stuff that people are like, holy crap, how did you do that? That's cool. That's what you guys do, basically.
Yeah, exactly. We like to say, let me try and get this right, is we want people to take our ingredients and transform normal meals into like memorable and magical experiences. We really want people to change something that everyone knows into something that becomes an experience rather than just a dinner.
Excellent. So you're actually a chef by kind of your career path, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
So what got you into this style of cooking?
Well, I was a chef for a number of years, about 10 years. And then obviously working in kitchens gets a little bit rough on the body, hard to start a family, things like that. So I decided I wanted to go into teaching. I began teaching at a Le Cordon Bleu program out here in Boston. And then from there, I worked up, I pretty much taught whatever class they needed me to teach, and I settled into contemporary cuisine because that was more of the type of cooking that I did. And from there, I was just, working with the students on, things like foaming, spherification. And so I got a little bit of, knowledge. I knew some of it beforehand, but then I started to really learn about it. And then I went from there to, teaching it, which is really tough. So you have to really know it at that point. And I had a really great kind of mentor who was another instructor there who was incredibly smart. And he taught me a lot about it. So then when the school went into what's called a teach out, which means they're not going to be accepting any more students. And I needed to find a job. Thankfully, I found a job here at Modernist Pantry. And it's been a great 3 years I've been here. And I've learned so much since I've been here, obviously, because I have all these ingredients at my fingertips to kind of mess around and play with.
Right. And there's nothing like being hands-on day to day to kind of really get a deep understanding of an ingredient or,
Yeah.
a set of tools in front of you. So
Yeah,
I
you
can
have to
only
mess up a
imagine.
lot of things before you really understand an ingredient. So you ruin it a bunch, and then you go, "Oh, okay, I understand what I can and can't do with this."
Right. I've made a lot of terrible cocktails. I'm just going to go ahead and admit that for sure. So, and it's all probably one of the most important part of learning is making mistakes and,
Oh yeah.
moving forward. So, so very cool. So you're definitely the right guy to have on this podcast. And I'm just start picking your brain on ingredients and kind of techniques. So I remember when I was in fine dining many, many years ago, probably 10 years ago, we would get these ingredients in and we would just start playing with them. And nobody really knew how to utilize them in the kitchen or even cocktails. I mean, that was a whole different category back then of
Mhm.
how to use this stuff. But I remember there were some pretty broad categories of types of things that we would do, mostly foam.
Yeah.
We try to get foam, and I know there's a couple different types of foams that you could use in ingredients with that. Spherification was another one, or caviars as we called it back then. And also I know there's quite a few different techniques as far as this goes.
Yeah.
But can you give us kind of like the lowdown on foams, how they work, some of the ingredients, and
Yeah.
what are some of the, actually most important, what are some of the limiting factors? Because I know some ingredients work well with low pH or high pH, and some ingredients don't work well with alcohol. So
We actually, there's a number of foaming ingredients. So the most common one probably back then was soy lecithin powder, and you could put soy lecithin powder into a liquid. You could blend it up with a hand blender or like like a cappuccino foamer or something like that, and boom, you have a little bit of foam that you can put on top. But the problem with soy lecithin powder is it dissipates after a few minutes. So you're on the clock the second it hits that plate, especially if it's a hot plate, or if you put it onto a cocktail, that alcohol is going to start breaking the surface tension of those little bubbles. That's the important part, is that these ingredients create surface tension. They're surfactants, so they allow the bubbles to be formed, and they allow them to go onto a dish. But if you start adding things, let's just say like oil or alcohol, it's going to start popping those bubbles. So an ingredient we have, it's probably the best foaming agent that there is called Foam Magic, and it creates extremely stable foams that tolerate the high pH or low pH, depending on what you're dealing with. So if it's very acidic, it's low pH. It tolerates salt. It also tolerates alcohol content up to about 50%. So if you're going to be doing a straight, liquor or liqueur, one thing I've done Cointreau before, I've done Galliano, especially with it, is I just dilute it 50% with water and then, make a foam. You just need that water in there because that's what attaches to the ingredient, and that's what allows it to foam.
Okay.
It doesn't really attach to alcohol. So you have to have that extra water, and it doesn't change the flavor of it. If anything, you're just making it a little bit more mild, especially if it's going to be, floating on top of a cocktail.
Right.
No one wants a big mouthful of straight alcohol, and then you have this drink that you're trying to catch the flavor.
Right. Yeah.
So you can dilute it. You can put whatever in there to dilute it. It doesn't just have to be water, but it's got to be water based.
So like a simple syrup, a flavored simple syrup or something like that could.
But then think about if simple syrup's 50% sugar.
Right. Okay.
So that it can attach to that, but it's very different. It needs to attach to water.
Okay.
So if it's a very light simple syrup, or even if it just has a little bit of sugar, like it's 10% sugar and 90% water, you just got to make sure that there's some water content rather than just the alcohol, right?
Okay.
So, yeah, it's got to grab onto something. So
Now,
Foam Magic's that ingredient. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, is this a product that is vegan friendly? Just kind of throwing it out there. Okay.
Yeah, vegan, vegetarian friendly. I don't know off the top of my head about non-GMO, anything like that. But
sure, yeah.
If you go to our website, modernistpantry.com, and you go into the search section, on the left side there will be, if you are looking for non-GMO, you can click it and it'll show you the ingredients that are, so it's really easy to kind of navigate that way.
Great. Awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's fine. I can talk forever, so please.
So you were mentioning some other foaming ingredients.
Yeah. So one quick thing before I get into the other foaming ingredients, because I really kind of want to stress it. Foam Magic is the best. if you're just making foams for cocktails or whatever. It's super stable. It makes really beautiful, large, lacy, bubbles for drinks and dishes. But one thing is that you can also take it and put it into a whipping siphon. So, whether it be Modernist Pantry branded or ISI, whatever it happens to be, you pop it in there and charge it with N2O, and you can get a really beautiful, dense foam out of it. So that sits really well on top of cocktails, and it just works really great. So it makes this really thick, dense foam that you can pop on top of cocktails and just float on there.
Excellent. I was actually going to ask you on preparation and kind of for service and stuff like that. So it sounds like a whipper is probably one of the best ways of holding this for long-term service. Could you use a cappuccino whipper or a whisk or something to kind of do a la minute? Or
if you have if you're doing a la minute, you can do it. You just pop on that and blend it up. But we also have a little tool that if you want those large lacy bubbles and you don't really feel like sitting there and doing it for every cocktail, let's just say it's a signature cocktail and you're making 100 of them a night, cut down 15 seconds or 10 seconds off of each one of those. It saves you a lot of time to open all those Bud Lights you're opening. So if you take this tool, it's called the Magic Air Maker, and you just put it into like a Cambro or whatever, Lexan container that you have in a restaurant setting, or even at home if you have like a large container. You put your flavorful, liquid with the foam magic right in the bottom of it, and it's basically just like this stone that aerates it. Mm-hmm. And this will just continuously pump out foam. But the foam is so stable that it can last, an hour, hour and a half after it's made. So you can just constantly spoon it off. And after a while, it'll start to just thicken up the liquid in the bottom. So you could still make bubbles or foam, but you could just make another one. Maybe 1 cup of this flavorful liquid can make 100 cocktails.
Wow. Okay.
Rough off the top of my head, but it makes such fine lacy bubbles that you can just float them right on top. And that makes life so easy. If you could just, if you put it into a bucket of ice water, and you're pumping out foam, first off, health inspectors are going to get mad at you. And second, you have this foam all night during service.
Sure. And before we go too much further, I've just got to check my credit card to make sure I have enough balance, because it's going to be an expensive podcast. Because
all this stuff is relatively inexpensive, though. That's the best part, is you can get it down, these ingredients at 50 grams, and the tool is unbelievably inexpensive. I think it's like $29.99.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you just pop it right into whatever you're making, and boom, you have cocktails for life.
Perfect. Excellent. And it sounds like something that would be absolutely ideal for high volume service. I mean,
of course.
The idea of just scooping it onto a cocktail versus, having to do it all a minute or charging it or whatever. This sounds kind of like the way to go.
Yeah. And even if you're just throwing a dinner party and you got this big thing of, foam sitting in the corner near your little bar area or whatever you're doing, right? People could go and serve themselves right off.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Really cool stuff like that. It's so simple, and you can do it at home. And everyone wants to impress their friends. Come on,
sure.
That's what we're here for. So yeah, simple things like that we can absolutely do.
I was going to say Modernist Pantry, and I'm not trying to plug you guys or anything like that, but I was thinking about this when we were talking earlier. It's like Modernist Pantry is like the sexiest grocery store you could possibly go into. Oh, that's pretty cool. So any other ingredients that are typically used with foam?
Yeah, we have a bunch of ingredients that are used for foam. So if you're making like milk-based or cream-based foams, use something like a sucrose esters, which that works really well. But that's also one that it'll give you a very short lifespan on the foam itself. So, and all these, you can go to our blog, that blog.modernistpantry.com, and we're working on getting charts for everything, because we understand that we have a lot of ingredients and a lot of them are new to people. So a nice little helpful chart, as well as maybe a video series, depending on how you like to learn things.
Yeah.
Or, we have video series that are kind of talking about every ingredient that we have. And we also are, I'm making charts just so people can be like, oh, how much do I use? What do I use this with? What can I use this with? Because a lot of these, work in conjunction with each other. So
absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So you said sucrose esters for milk-based products. Is there any other ingredients? I can't think of anything off the top. I'm sure you have a giant list of them.
So, yeah, this is all off the top of my head too. So I know them all because I've worked with them so much. Polysorbate 80 works just like Foam Magic does, in the sense that it can make a lacy foam, it can make a dense foam, it can work with a hand whipper, it can work with a whipping siphon, it can, it works. It just works. It's used in a very small amount. It's liquid. The only downfall of this is that you have to put it with something that is very flavorful, because polysorbate 80 does have a little bit of a flavor to it. Most of our ingredients are neutral, but polysorbate 80 has a little bit of a flavor. Okay. It also has a ton of other uses. It's like one of the best emulsifiers out there. So if you put a little drop of it into, I'm just thinking of, breads or mayonnaise or anything that you need to, hold water to oil, it can work in there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, and then another foaming agent, we actually just did a little episode that's going to be coming out very soon, is called VersaWhip. And this is also used for foaming, but it's used in a different way as these other ones, we're putting into whipping siphons or, hand blenders, but this one you put into a mixer and it makes like a meringue.
Okay.
So any liquid that you can think of can be turned into a meringue. And
that's cool.
Yeah, the same texture. So if you wanted to put, we'll just say for cocktail senses, you wanted to put like a salty meringue on top of like a margarita inspired, so you could do all that. You get the same texture. It looks really beautiful. It can sit on top. It can have that texture of meringue, but it's salty. It could have lime in it. You could make it completely out of lime juice if you wanted to. I don't know why you would want to, but you understand what I mean. Like you can really flavor it and not have to worry about egg yolk or egg white, who can drink this, who can't drink this, all this type of things that we have to think about as culinary professionals. So this is completely vegan. You can use it in the same way as egg whites, but you don't have to worry about who can and can't drink this.
Sure. So like just off the top of my head, I think like dirty martini. So you can put olive juice with VersaWhip, whip it up to a meringue, put it right on top of the martini. All of a sudden you got this kind of a two-part cocktail where every sip is a little bit briny, kind of an evolution or a new direction for that. That's really cool.
Just a different texture, different visual too when people get it, because that's a big part of it.
Sure.
Keep our eyes first. I know it's cliche, but like it's very true. So
right. Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. And I'm just generating a ton of ideas based off our conversation. So hopefully you don't mind me interjecting with like, what about this? What about that? Because this is all super fascinating to me and very exciting. Now, one of the things I tried a long time ago, and I was hoping I could pick your brain on, was I tried to do like blue cheese stuffed olives in a martini. It's kind of a thing. Bartenders hate it because if you don't buy blue cheese stuffed olives, you have to do it by hand.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
As I'm sure you're fully aware of. But I was trying to make a blue cheese foam to go on top of a dirty martini. But the problem I was having was it would bleed. It would leach out into the actual cocktail. So it turned all this kind of milky and kind of disgusting looking. But is there a suggestion you would have to kind of like go down this road?
So there's one that works really well with fats. None of the ones I mentioned already work with fat. So if you try to make them with fat, or you try to make them with pure alcohol, or well, probably not pure alcohol, but liquor or anything like that, most of them are not going to work.
Okay.
But mono and diglycerides is a fat-based ingredient so what I would suggest is you could take your blue cheese. So you could take oil, very neutral flavored oil, I would suggest for what you're doing. You're going to melt in the monodiglycerides into the oil. So you have to heat it up to at least 140 degrees for these to melt.
Okay.
Then I would add in your blue cheese.
Okay.
I would blend it in there. It depends on the blue cheese you're going to use, because some of them, when you blend it all in, it's going to turn gray, and that's not really sexy for what we're trying to do.
Right.
So it really depends on the blue cheese that you're using. You could also try to infuse it in there. It'll take a little bit of testing on your part, but you could get the flavor in there really easy.
Yeah, I
So,
think the direction I took was I infused it into either cream or milk,
yeah.
just to kind of stretch it out because it's such a strong flavor,
Hmm.
and I felt like the milk, the liquid, would actually help with the creation of the bubbles and
Yes.
stuff like that. That's the direction I went. That went horribly wrong.
Yeah, because it's going to mix with the drink itself.
Right. That's exactly what happened. So I was like, fine, throw it
So
away.
this one's completely oil based, so it's going to sit on top of the water.
Okay.
So what you would do with this now, after you put in your blue cheese, however you add it,
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely suggest blending it because you need it to be smooth.
Sure.
You're going to put it into a whipping siphon. Now you can make foam out of this. So
Now I need to try this.
yeah, you may have to mess around with it a little bit because I don't think you're going to need, an inch of foam on top of a cocktail that is, right. So, or you could even do, olive brine and blue cheese in the liquid.
Sure.
You may have to add olive brine to the martini, but yeah, so you don't have to do like blue cheese stuffed olives, but you get all the flavors. So you can make it dirty and then add the blue cheese to it. So
very cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to revisit that. That was a cocktail I put on the back burner 10 years ago. So
you'll be able to do it. Or here's one thing: is if you use olive oil, right? And then so what the monodiglycerides does is when you add it to that oil, it think about when you put olive oil in the refrigerator, it thickens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what the monodiglycerides do is it can thicken at like room temperature at the certain ratio that use it. So it's about 8 to 10% of the total weight of the oil that you're using. So it's great that you could put this in there. You can then, make a foam that tastes like olive and blue cheese. You can put it on top of your cocktail. Even if it's just like a little, dollop that's kind of floating around and someone can, scoop it out, or you can pretend by putting a toothpick through it, obviously, because it's not going to be the same as, but you can get all the olive flavor and blue cheese in there.
That's really cool.
Without it mixing, because it's made completely of oil.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really cool. All right. Well, that's going to the shopping cart, so thank you. Now, is there any one particular ingredient that you would recommend for alcohol, for making foam alcohols? I know you mentioned
foam magic. That's the only one I really think you should, because I know it works. You just have to dilute the alcohol by 50%.
Okay.
The other ones, I haven't tested them too intensively to be able to be like, oh yeah, but I already know that the other ones dissipate so quick that it's not even really worth it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm gonna definitely have to check that out. Okay, and that one you said you also is pretty stable with pH levels.
Yeah,
so acids. Great. So you have
perfect with acids, so no issues. It's called foam magic for a reason. It works wonders. So
yeah, cool, excellent. Well, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. Now, the other thing that I think we typically do with cocktails and bars and stuff was spherification or caviars.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have a long list of ingredients and techniques that we could use to kind of get better results with these.
So this is quite the topic.
Okay.
Spherification looks simple. I actually just wrote an article that's eventually going to, probably at the end of this week, will go up on our blog.
Mm-hmm.
It's just spherification is it looks simple because it's so clean, right? It's these little spheres that pop when you bite into it. But there's a lot of little things to making spheres. And we have a bunch of kits on our site. So I would suggest checking out a kit if you want to do spherification.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you get at least these ingredients. Off the top of my head, I don't know which kit carries all of them. Mm-hmm. But you're going to want, obviously, sodium alginate, which is the main. We also have different variations. We have Sphere Magic, which, just like Foam Magic, Sphere Magic works much quicker. So with Sphere Magic, it takes about 10 minutes to hydrate, whereas regular sodium alginate can take up to 24 hours.
Oh.
You can imagine which one you'd want to use, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. You're going to need some type of calcium. It really depends on what you're doing. Are you doing direct spherification? If you are, you're going to need calcium chloride, because that is really high calcium content, and that's it's going to make the nice, quickest spheres. If you're going to do reverse spherification, you're going to need calcium lactate, because calcium lactate has no flavor. And when you're making reverse spherification, you're adding the calcium lactate to the flavorful liquid that you're making spheres out of. So you don't want something that is bitter, like calcium chloride, in your spherification liquid or whatever the spheres are going to be. So that's relatively simple. But spherification is such a dense topic because, yes, there is direct, which I mentioned. There's reverse. There is then frozen reverse. And also what I just added to my article was cold oil spherification. And we're going to save that one for the end. Well, so as to not,
confuse everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Some people, their brains have already melted. Trust me. I used to teach this stuff to kids right out of high school, and they would just stare at me until their minds just melted and retained none of the information. So I understand how it can be very dense, and this is a very different way of looking at cooking and stuff. So
sure,
bear with me here. With direct spherification, what you're doing in the most basic sense is that you're adding sodium alginate or sphere magic, depending on which one you want to use, to a flavorful liquid. That is going to slightly thicken it. Sodium alginate is a thickener in its most basic form. That's what it does. But sodium alginate, when it comes into contact with calcium, creates a gel immediately. So when you take those little droplets and you drop them into the calcium bath, right? So you droplets of sodium alginate and your flavorful liquid into the calcium bath, they create a thin gel shell around the liquid. You're able to let them sit in there for a little bit until they make a gel. You can scoop them out, you can rinse them, you can serve them immediately. Hooray, you have spheres. One other thing you mentioned earlier when we talked about foams, a lot of these ingredients hate acid.
Right.
They can't tolerate it. So if it goes below a 4 pH, none of this will work. It will be extremely frustrating. I remember when I first tried, probably around 2008, 2009, to make balsamic spheres, and none of it worked. And I was like, this stuff's for the birds. I'm out of here, right? So it's like, I just wanted nothing to do with it because I just didn't understand. And there was no literature, especially around that time, that I could readily get my hands on. Even on the internet, stuff was still being weighed and measured in teaspoons and tablespoons. And
sure,
with this stuff, get a gram scale, learn how to use grams. It's going to change your life. Because if you don't already, you absolutely should. Just because if you need, let's just say 0.5 grams, that's, what is it? 1/60th of an ounce? Like, how are you going to measure that in tablespoons, teaspoons, anything like that? It's nearly impossible. So getting back to the acidity, you're going to need a buffer. So another ingredient that you're going to want to look for in a kit that you get is sodium citrate. And what this does is this will bring the flavorful liquid up to that 4. So before you even add the sodium alginate, you want to make sure it's at least at a 4 pH. That's a big part of this.
Sure.
They will not work. Last thing, you don't want to do a liquid that contains calcium already. If you do, your sodium alginate is just going to gel immediately, right? So people sometimes will message me and say, oh, I want to do it with, this, or milk or cream base. It's like, well, that's very difficult because it contains calcium. Sodium alginate gels when it touches calcium. So there is an ingredient that will sequester calcium. And what that basically means, it just kind of hides the calcium ions that are in the liquid itself. It's very difficult to do with milk because it can turn the milk from creamy and white to yellow.
Oh, interesting.
Because it hides all the calcium, which is what's making the milk that white.
Ah.
Yeah, so it's not really appealing. It looks gross.
Sure.
And you use it at such like a high percentage that it's not really worth it. But this ingredient is called sodium hexametaphosphate. I don't want to have to spell that, so we're just going to call it.
I got it.
X.
Yeah. Sodium X?
Sodium hex.
Oh, hex. Got it. Okay.
You can just call it hex too. Everyone will understand it.
Got it.
But yeah, if you just type in sodium H on our website, it'll probably be the only one that pops up. But yeah, that hides calcium. So if you're doing something like blackberry juice, and I always use this example, blackberries contain calcium. Not a lot of people know it. It's just enough calcium to make that sodium alginate gel, which will then ruin your day. So a little bit of this sodium hexametaphosphate will cover up those calcium ions, and then you can make blackberry spheres if that's what you're trying to do.
Got it. And probably the best way, you can probably look it up, like type in, does X contain calcium?
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes you just look for, if you look on the back, especially if you're using prepackaged juices, things like that, sometimes they fortify with calcium, so definitely watch out for that. But you can definitely see if it has 0% calcium, you should be fine.
Okay.
But yeah, go on the internet. If you're using fresh, go on the internet and check it out. You should be very easy to find if it has calcium or not.
All right. Excellent. Now, is that pretty much it for direct spherification?
Yeah. Yeah. So direct spherification, I mean, that is the most basic form. One last thing maybe I'll touch on is just that over time, since the entire sphere is made of sodium alginate, and when sodium alginate comes in contact with calcium, it will become solid. Right. So there won't be a liquid center after a certain amount of time.
I'm glad you're touching upon this because this is my follow-up question. So I very much appreciate this one.
So yeah, you don't want a solid sphere if you're looking for those liquid centers, right? So that's why there is a method called reverse spherification. And it's just that. It's taking the ingredients and you're reversing them. You take the sodium alginate and you're going to make a setting bath, just like you did the calcium before. And then you're taking the calcium, granted you're using calcium lactate as opposed to calcium chloride. Calcium chloride's bitter, that's why you're using calcium lactate. And you're going to add that to your flavorful liquid. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. It's hard to put a thin liquid into a thick liquid. So if you're making, let's just say, because I have a recipe for this, margarita spheres. I put this really thin liquid that has alcohol in it too, and I try and set it down on top of a thick liquid, it's just going to sit on top.
Right.
It'll create a little gel, but I'm going to have it'll be more like, a puddle rather than a sphere.
Got it.
So you can then thicken that liquid. And an ingredient you can look for in a kit is something like xanthan gum. So in a very small quantity, less than a pinch, you can thicken it slightly. That way it will sink in your setting bath, right? Or the easier way, if you really like that thin liquid, you want it to burst, you want that full rush of kind of flavor coming out of the sphere, you can use what's known as frozen reverse spherification, where you take that thin liquid, you put it into little like hemispherical molds or half circles, and then you freeze it solid, and you take those little ice cubes that you've just made and you plunk them into the setting bath. You wait about 2 minutes, 3 minutes until they thawed out, and you can then scoop out your set spheres. That's the best way to do reverse spherification.
Great.
You can then also, you can mess with the sizes there because it's very difficult at home to make the caviar size, like you had mentioned before, those little tiny reverse spheres. Very difficult at home to be able to do that. So you could try and do it, frozen, or you can just purchase them at our website in little jars because it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do like in a home setting.
Yeah.
Especially in an abundance, right? If you need, let's just say 10 spheres for 100 hors d'oeuvres, like it's going to be so difficult for you to be able to pump those out, by hand. They won't sink because it's just not enough liquid to even sit on top. If you froze them, then you have to freeze these little itty bitty spheres. It's very difficult.
Right.
So I would suggest doing the larger, like full spheres for this. They're called raviolis. It's not my favorite word for it. I think, I don't know why. It's just, it doesn't sound correct to me, but it is. That's what they're called. But yeah, the larger spheres are called raviolis. The small one are caviar.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like, because this is the exact problem I ran into when I started doing this many, many years ago, is that it would just gel all the way through. So I never got the snap. It was more kind of like a really kind of weird gummy candy with the texture. This is before we started even considering a reverse spherification. And I don't think we ever used calcium lactate. Because we didn't even know it existed at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is really great. I'm gonna definitely have to try that out, because that was always my hang up, was just that solid gel. It's not very appetizing in a cocktail setting anyways.
Sometimes it's also about the ratio. So a lot of recipes will call for a 1% of sodium alginate to the amount of liquid you're using.
Sure.
I prefer if you do 1.4%. Sorry, this is in Sphere Magic. So 1.4% is Sphere Magic. If you're using regular sodium alginate, you're going to use 0.7%. So you always want to use double the amount of Sphere Magic. It's a pre-hydrated product, so it's a little bit lighter and fluffier in volume and weight. So you have to use about double the amount. But it just works so much faster that it's so worth it.
Yeah. Now, the Sphere Magic, is that something similar to the Foam Magic, where it's kind of the best ingredient to use for pH and
pH? It doesn't matter. It's still sodium alginate.
Okay.
The Foam Magic is like a proprietary blend that doesn't worry about pH, but the Sphere Magic is just sodium alginate. That's pre-hydrated, so it mixes in just that much better.
Okay.
So Perfect. That's what you want to use. It just doesn't affect the pH. The pH needs to be above 4 for any of those sphere.
That's right. You mentioned the buffer solution. So that's perfect. Okay. So it sounds like for the best possible Caviar's reverse spherification, if you do it, will get you the best results. If you want that kind of snap and kind of the liquidy center.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. Excellent. Cool. So did we miss anything as far as spherification goes, or is that pretty much covered?
Well, we were going to talk about the cold oil spherification.
Oh, yeah.
So this is good if you don't mind the solid spheres. Like if you're making very tiny little, caviar, or I like to call them pearls because they are solid all the way through. But you can make them out of any gelling agent. The only one I would suggest that you don't use is gelatin, because it takes a long time at a low temperature to gel. But you can take a gelling agent. Most people use agar. I prefer like Xanthan Gum F because it's so clear. It's like crystal clear, and you can make these really beautiful pearls out of it. So you're going to add in your gelling agent, whatever it happens to be, at the ratio that's provided, on the back of the package. You're going to bring it up to a boil, and then you're going to drop it in using a syringe into ice cold oil, like a neutral oil, just something like canola, whatever it happens to be. So you pop that in the freezer for an hour, make your batch of liquid, pull it out, and then you drop in using a syringe or perfect caviar maker, whatever you happen to use, into the oil, and they'll solidify in these perfect little gel balls of whatever color, flavor, whatever you're making. And then you can take those, you can sift them out. I would prefer storing them in the oil just because they're already in there. But you can take them out, rinse them really quick, and then put them into a drink. And they'll settle at the bottom. They'll move around. They're so small that they can move around with like carbonation and things like that too.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to make sure you just make them very small, but yeah, they'll be able to move around with carbonation. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I came across a video a long time ago. A gentleman by the name of Jamie Boudreau kind of was the forefront of this style of mixology back in, early 2000s, I want to say. And this is one of the things that he did was the cold oil purification. I think he was using gelatin at the time just because a lot of these other products probably weren't.
I don't find it to be the best just because it takes a long time sometimes when they get in there, and some of them can stick together just because it really needs to gel immediately when it gets down to the bottom.
Got it.
Or at least when it hits gets the oil. It needs to gel immediately.
So it sounds like every one of these techniques kind of have their own applications, their own kind of limits and boundaries, and some work better in certain scenarios than others, and all that. And we haven't even talked about hot ingredients.
No.
So we won't touch that because I think that's another rabbit hole.
Yes.
But this is all temperature independent. We're right now we're talking about pretty much cold ingredients, if I have to guess.
Yeah, we're talking about drinks right now, pretty
Perfect.
much. Cold drinks, at least.
Excellent. So I think that covers the majority of kind of the intro stuff for bartending and mixology. Is there anything else that you've seen that you're kind of excited about these days?
Yeah, we do have some really cool ingredients that we just kind of been showcasing. It's from this company that we work with called Alice and the Magician out of Vermont. And what Aaron, who is one of the owners there, he goes around and he sources really amazing ingredients, and then I don't know how he does it, but he gets the pure essence of these ingredients into either a spray form or elixir. So we have an aromatic spray and an elixir for a bunch of different aromas, and you can add them to cocktails without having to change the ratio of alcohol that you're using. You just add it to any cocktail, and he has like a bunch of different ones, and he's also given us a bunch of like trial ones. But one he gave to us, or that we have that we used in a recipe we did with him, was it's like a Thai street market. So you get like basil or Thai basil and cilantro and like all these aromas that you would find like in a certain setting. Right. So it's really nice, and you can just put one or two drops into your cocktail, and it completely changes the aromatics of the cocktail. So you can really, it looks exactly the same. It could just be your favorite recipe for gin and tonic, and then you just completely change it up. You completely change the complexity of it without having to muddle a bunch of stuff. You can just get some really great aromatics. And then also the spray, you make your cocktail, and then you can just spray it right down on top, depending on which spray. We have a ton of different ones, everything from, like citrus to coriander, things like that. You can spray it right down on the top of the glass. And when you go to take that first drink, you get, this nose full of the aroma, and then you get the drink that finishes it, and it completely just changes the experience.
Now, let me ask you a question on this one, because I just kind of had an idea about how I would kind of use some of these ingredients together. So let's say we're using some of the aromas in particular, and we build a cocktail. So let's say let's just use a margarita, for example. So we have a margarita. Let's say we do blackberry pearls, caviar inside, so we drop those in. Then we put a spray aroma, maybe ginger, across the top of that. And then we do a Cointreau foam on top of that, and do a kaffir lime spritz on top of that. Would that be, I'm not talking about flavor compatibility right now. Yeah. I'm just talking about like the sensation of drinking. Would you be able to identify every single one of those? Like the kaffir lime in the beginning as a nose, and then the flavor of the ginger, I guess, is what the other spray was.
I think it really depends on the cocktail.
Sure.
And the flavors you're using. Because if they're really complementary, then you can really, you could get them. If you did like, it's tough right now just off the top of our head, but if you did, let's just say a Manhattan, and you had maple pearls, and then I know I don't want to give too much away, but it's like a tobacco essence that could potentially be coming out. But you put that on top, so you can get all these kind of flavors that are really built into like a good bourbon cocktail.
Sure. That
accentuate it rather than, I don't necessarily know if that you begin a cocktail and end a cocktail having, going on a journey, because it's such a short amount of time.
Right.
I don't necessarily know if everybody is going to be like sitting there looking for it unless you explain it. Depends on your setting, I'm sure, but you could, I guess, you could be really awesome at being a bartender or a mixologist. But I think you absolutely could, because as long as they're not overdone, one is, really balanced with the other. It's just like any, savory cooking, pastry, anything like that. As long as it's balanced, people will be able to pick it out.
Sure, absolutely. No, that's great. I didn't mean to cut you off,
no worries.
But I was like, oh man, this is something I'd love to experiment with. But is there, so they have the elixir, which is meant to be dropped in to really enhance the flavor. And then you have the aromatic spray, which enhances the aroma in the nose of the cocktail.
Yeah, they both enhance aroma. The elixir is a little bit, I remember he explained it to me. I can't remember how he did it or how he explained it properly, so I don't want to mess it up. But yeah, there's two senses. There's, retronasal and olfactory, and, one stimulates one and one stimulates the other. So you can really get, kind of a little bit of a journey, not necessarily basic, but, good quality ingredients. And then these elixirs and aromas can really just amp it up, change it without having to add any extra muddled whatnot or, too many garnishes, which happens a lot. So yeah, you can really, it could look basic. And then when people drink, they go, whoa, what did I just have? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Very cool. Well, that's in the shopping cart. So thank you for that. So anything else you're kind of excited about that you've been trying out and you're like, this could be a lot of fun?
I mean, there's so many things we try out, like tons of different recipes and ingredients. And we have our web show, which takes up a lot of time of just, okay, we want to make things that are new and fun. And we are probably going to have Aaron down from Alice and the Magician again. He came down and he did 4 cocktails with us, actually 5 cocktails with us. And then we shot some videos with him, just showing off the cocktails and recipes. And, I put a little bit of our ingredients in there, whether it be our culinary crystals, which is like our own proprietary like pop rock system that you can, customize your own pop rocks and things like that. Yeah. So, it really depends where you want to go with it, but, and so many things now, like on our plate of just ingredients and recipes, and just constantly coming up with new ideas and new ways to implement them. And I would just say, stick around. Stay tuned to like our blog and our web series, because that's where all of our stuff comes out. We try to pump out at least 1 to 2, either article or recipe a week. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes it ends up being like 5 recipes a week. But they all go up onto our blog, and you can absolutely go up there and just check them out, because there's always something new.
Yeah, we'll definitely include the links in the show notes for sure for everything. But talk to me more about these pop rocks. I'm super interested, because is it something that you can actually make your own customize your own flavors of pop rocks?
We have an assortment of flavors. I don't remember the exact amount, just because it's close to maybe like 50 different flavor drops that we sell.
Oh wow! Okay.
So you can take the pop or the culinary crystals. You got to coat them in a little bit of what's called flavor base, and in that flavor base, you put a few very small drops of the flavored drops. So it could be anything from black pepper to maple to toffee, whatever you want to flavor them as. Lemon, hot chili pepper, whatever. Then you can mix it into the culinary crystals. Toss them in the freezer for a little bit to kind of let that flavor base set, and then they will taste of the drops that you put on there. So then you could rim glasses. It's a little bit difficult to rim glasses because you can't put water near them.
Sure.
So if water touches them, they start to pop.
Yeah.
You can, if you have some sort of fat, you can rim a glass with that, and then put a little bit of the culinary crystals on the rim of the glass that way.
That's awesome. I never thought about using fat as a agent to rim glasses. That's pretty cool. And I can my mind is already like, oh, I can do this, I can do that.
Yeah.
And that can be a lot of fun to play with, especially if you have control over the flavors that you can add to it, or even if it's just a neutral flavor. If the culinary crystal in itself is neutral, that could be a whole other.
Sweet. I mean, it's made of sugar, so yeah, it's just sweet.
Oh, very cool. Well, all this is going in the cart, so I appreciate it.
No problem.
Now, you've been doing this for a long time. It sounds like quite a few years. Do you have a favorite memory of experience with these ingredients, or going out to dinner and experiencing this type of cuisine?
So I think the favorite memory, it just kind of comes down to oh, I understand this now, right? So it's not necessarily like a food, like the first time I ate it or anything like that. It's just, oh, I get this. I get why this works. And then now I understand more how food works, literally just by doing this. And it's good to change the way you generally think about food, because when we first taught, it's like, all right, if you go to a French school, you cook, French cuisine, and it's measured like this, and all of our books are in, American volume measurements. And it's like, okay, and if you're going to cook like that for the rest of your life, then what are you really doing? Obviously you need to evolve. And then when I first started getting into this, obviously, remember I told you, tried to make balsamic pearls, didn't work, gave up on it immediately because I wasn't going to waste my time during service trying to do something that I couldn't do.
Right.
But now that I know how to do it, I could go back. If I could go back in time, it's so simple, right? It's just one extra ingredient,
right?
To fix what you were doing. You could have done it, and that's the best part about cooking. Is like, I'll never ever know everything.
Yeah,
never. I'll never see every ingredient. I'll never see every dish. Every region in every country and every province in every state has one specific dish that's attributed to it. And there's no way I could ever go and see all of them, but I could try, and I can attempt to learn as much as possible. And this is just one thing that I'm learning about. And we have 300 ingredients or tools here that I'm still learning, and I don't know everything about them. I've been here for 3 years, and I've worked with them every single day, and we're always getting new ones. We're always researching new ones, doing our due diligence to stay ahead of the curve so that when people want them, they have a place to come and get them.
Awesome. That's very cool. Well, I think that's kind of covers everything. I mean, there's so much to absorb from this conversation, to be completely honest. And, you were just talking about a different way of thinking about ingredients and stuff. It's very much the same case in bartending. We think of alcohol, we think of acid, and we think of sweet, but now we have to kind of consider fats and pH levels, and, something contains calcium, or what are behind the ingredients, what makes up the ingredients that we're already using. And I think that really takes a little bit more studying and a little bit more interest in finding these out, so that we can apply these new techniques and these new ingredients to make a really amazing cocktails for our guests. So I appreciate all your time, and thank you for all your insight on how these chemicals, or how these ingredients and techniques all work together, because they're not chemicals. They're kind of naturally
everything's
occurring.
Chemicals. That's the thing. It's like everything's chemicals. So
fair enough. Baking
soda and baking powder in almost everyday cooking, we never think of it.
Yeah.
But it's sodium bicarbonate, and it's hard to change our mind, because we've heard, oh, that's just chemicals, and you read it on the back of packages. But all you have to do is do a little bit of research and learn about it. You realize that all this stuff is safe. It's been used for decades, and now we have the ability to change how we look at food because of it.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, no, it's been an incredible conversation. I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure that we could have hours and hours and hours of conversation based off these topics, but I know you're a busy man. So thank you again. And hopefully in the future we can have you on and brainstorm a couple other fun
Whatever
ideas.
You want.
All
Whatever
right.
You want. I'll come on.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. So thanks again to Scott Guerin for hanging out with us and kind of just giving us a big overview of molecular mixology, or modern mixology, as he likes to call it. You can definitely find all the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/142, and also check out their online store at www.modernistpantry.com. Now, if you could do us a favor, if you're enjoying this podcast, if you leave a review for us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to us on, it would mean a lot to us, and it would help us reach more people. So we definitely appreciate that, and we'll have more interviews and podcasts out for you in the future. But until then, have a great shift, and cheers, everyone.